The storm slammed against the cabin like an angry ghost, rattling the windows until dust rained from the rafters. But the sound that froze Evelyn Harper's heart wasn't the thunder. It was the knock-3 slow. Heavy-wrapped she stood by the flickering oil lamp, her breath misting in the cold air, the shotgun trembling in her hands. Outside, the wind howled across the barren plains, carrying sand, rain, and something darker, the scent of blood and smoke. "Please, don't come inside," she whispered to the door, her voice barely audible above the storm. Through the warped glass, a figure loomed, a tall man, broad-shouldered, half-shrouded in darkness. Lightning flashed, and for one haunting instant she saw him clearly. Long black hair plastered to his face by the rain, muscles slick and scarred, his chest bare despite the cold. His eyes glowed faintly in the lightning's glare eyes of someone who had seen too much and survived too long. The Apache. Warrior. Nakai. Every whisper in town spoke of him, how he'd once dragged a wounded cavalryman 50 miles through the desert just to make him confess, how he'd killed 3 men in a single night at Bitter Creek. The ranchers called him the mean one, the kind of man whose soul had been burned away by loss and revenge, and yet here he was, standing at her door, swaying in the rain. "Evelyn," he said, his voice deep and rough as gravel. "I need your help." She froze. He knew her name. Her finger brushed the trigger, but her heart refused to follow. "You can't be here. The marshals will hang me if they find you." "I didn't come to beg," he said, blood trickling down his arm. "I came because you didn't look away." Her breath caught. Months ago, she had seen him once in dry water, the day a drunken group of ranchers tied him to a post, mocking him, cutting his hair. Everyone else had turned away. She hadn't. She had stared back at him for only a heartbeat. But he'd remembered. Now in the heart of a storm, that small act had brought him to her doorstep. "Please, just go," she said, voice trembling. "I don't want trouble." A cold gust slammed the shutters open, and the lamplight wavered. Evelyn caught the glint of metal, his hand pressed against a wound near his ribs. The blood dark and steady. Lightning split the sky again, painting the scene in silver. She saw it then, the faint tremor in his knees, the exhaustion in his eyes. Whatever battles Nakai had fought, this one had nearly finished him. "Let me die here," he whispered. "At least let me rest where the rain can't reach." Her resolve cracked. She had lived alone for 6 years since her husband died in the mining accident. The silence had become her only companion. Yet now, looking at this broken, dangerous man, something deeper stirred. Fear, yes, but also something else. A strange, aching compassion she couldn't explain. She lowered the shotgun. "You can't stay long." He nodded once. As she unlatched the door, the storm roared in like a wild beast. Rain soaked the floorboards, thunder rattled the roof, and Nakai stumbled inside, leaving a trail of red behind him. The scent of earth and blood filled the air. Evelyn hurried to bolt the door, her heart hammering. "Sit by the fire," she ordered. "You'll catch your death." He obeyed, sinking into a chair like a man carrying mountains on his back. The firelight glimmered on his scars, old burns, knife marks, bullet tracks. His body was a map of every battle he'd survived. She knelt to toss more wood on the fire, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were wide with fear and pity. His dark and unreadable searched her face as though it were something sacred. "Why did you come here, Nakai?" she asked softly. He stared into the flames. "Because I remembered your eyes," he said, "and I knew they didn't belong to a liar." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You don't know what you're saying." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Maybe not, but I know what dying feels like. And this storm, it smells the same." Outside, thunder crashed like a rifle shot. She flinched, clutching her shawl tighter. He looked up at her again. "Please," he murmured. "Don't send me back out there." Evelyn's heart waged war against her reason. Every voice in her head screamed to lock the door, to let him die and keep herself safe. But her hands moved on their own, reaching for the kettle, pouring him tea. As though she were serving an old friend, when she turned back, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't name, part sorrow, part gratitude, part something deeper. The fire crackled. The storm raged, and in that fragile silence between thunderclaps, Evelyn Harper realized her life would never be the same again. The cabin smelled of rain, blood, and burning pine wood. Evelyn's hands shook as she tore an old bedsheet into strips, the fabric fraying under her fingers. Behind her, Nakai sat slumped near the fire, steam rising from his wet skin. His breathing came in harsh, uneven bursts, each one followed by a soft grunt of pain. "Take your hand away," she said quietly. Approaching with the cloth, he obeyed without a word, and blood welled up from the wound beneath his ribs, a jagged cut, dark and deep, the kind that spoke of a fight no man should have survived. The crimson spilled down his side, staining the wooden floor. Evelyn winced but didn't falter. She'd tended wounds before her husband's years ago after the mine fights. But this was different. Nakai's body was a map of battles and betrayals, each scar etched into his flesh like stories no one dared to ask about. When the whiskey touched his skin, he didn't flinch. He just looked at her, those black, unyielding eyes reflecting the firelight like two polished stones. "You've lost too much blood," she muttered, dabbing carefully. "Better my blood than hers," he murmured. She froze. "Whose?" He looked away, jaw tightening. The silence between them grew thick, heavy with things unsaid. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, and the old cabin shivered as if it, too, feared his answer. Evelyn wrung out the cloth, her hands trembling. "You can't stay here, Nakai. The marshal's men patrol these roads." "If they find you, they already found me," he interrupted, voice low. "Just didn't finish the job." Her stomach turned cold. She'd known violence her whole life in this land, the gunfights, the grudges, the men who thought killing proved something. But the look in Nakai's eyes wasn't the look of a killer. It was the look of a man who'd seen too much death to fear his own. "You need rest," she whispered. "You won't make it through the night if that wound opens again." He gave a faint, almost amused smile. "You care too much for a woman who says she doesn't want trouble." She glared at him, though her cheeks flushed. "Caring doesn't mean I trust you." The corner of his mouth lifted. "It's a start." Evelyn wrapped the bandage tightly around his torso. When her fingers brushed his skin, she felt the tremor in his body, not just from pain, but from exhaustion and something deeper. He wasn't just running from men. He was running from memories. When she finished, she sat across from him near the fire, keeping the shotgun close. The flames cast trembling shadows across the walls, making the small room feel smaller still. "You said something outside," she began carefully, "that I didn't look away." "What did you mean?" He took a long breath, eyes fixed on the fire. "The day the ranchers tied me to that post in town, they spat on me, cut my hair, broke my nose for sport. I looked for a single face in that crowd that didn't smile. Found yours." Evelyn's heart twisted. She remembered that day too well, the cruel laughter, the rain, the sound of fists hitting flesh. She had been standing by the feed store frozen, unable to intervene but unable to turn away either. "I didn't think you saw me," she whispered. "I saw you," he said simply. "And I remembered." The fire popped, scattering sparks across the hearth. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "You shouldn't have come here. People will think that you took pity on a savage." He finished for her. "Let them think what they want." Evelyn turned toward the window where the wind rattled the shutters. "You don't understand this place," They don't forgive. Not you, not me. If they find you here, it'll be my neck on the rope too. Nakai stood slowly, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. He walked to the window, gazing into the darkness where the rain had slowed to a drizzle. You think I came here to live? He asked quietly. No, I came here to remember what it feels like not to be hunted. Evelyn's throat went dry. Then why risk your life for that? He turned back to her, and in the glow of the fire she saw something raw in his expression, a mixture of grief and defiance. Because I lost something, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Someone. And the man who took her from me wore a wedding ring just like yours. The words hit her like a gunshot. Her husband's ring still hung from her neck, a habit of mourning she could never break. Her breath caught. What are you saying? But Nakai only looked down, his silence more terrifying than any answer. Outside, thunder growled again, as if the heavens themselves were warning her nothing about this night would end quietly. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the plains wrapped in a cold gray mist. The scent of wet earth crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, mingling with the faint odor of wood smoke and blood. Evelyn Harper stood by the stove, stirring the last of her coffee, her hands shaking so badly that she spilled half of it. Behind her, Nake slept in the chair near the fire. His head rested against the wall, the blanket she draped over him sliding to the floor. For the first time, she saw his face without the storm's distortion hard lines softened by exhaustion. Lashes long against weathered skin. A man who looked both ancient and heartbreakingly young. She wanted to hate him. Needed to. But every time she looked at him, she saw a kind of pain that mirrored her own, the kind that never healed, only hid. When she turned to refill his cup, the floor creaked. His eyes snapped open instantly, sharp and alert. You move quiet, he said, voice rough. You sleep light, she replied. He gave a faint nod, scanning the window. Storm's over. They'll come looking for me soon. She froze. You mean the marshal? Naka's gaze drifted to the fire. Not just him. Men who wear badges and men who don't, they all hunt the same way. Evelyn swallowed hard. Then you have to leave. I will, he said softly. After I find what I came for. She frowned. Find what? Instead of answering, he stood, steadying himself with one hand against the wall. The firelight glinted off the tribal, jewelry at his neck, beads and bones that whispered of a life far removed from hers. He limped toward the door, but stopped suddenly, turning his head as if hearing something beneath the floor. He crouched, pressing his palm to the old wooden boards. What is it? Evelyn asked, heart thudding. Something buried, he murmured. Before she could stop him, he pushed the table aside and began tearing at the planks with a hunting knife. The sound of wood splintering filled the room, raw and violent. Nakai, stop! You'll ruin the floor. But he didn't listen. Within minutes, his knife hit something solid, a hollow thud. He dug faster, his breathing ragged. Then the tip of the blade scraped against metal. Evelyn stepped closer, her stomach twisting. What on earth? He pried up a small box, rusted, dented, caked in dirt. When he lifted the lid, a gasp tore from her throat. Inside lay a used cavalry insignia, a pouch of gold coins and a small silver locket. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she picked it up. The hinge creaked open and she froze. Inside was a photograph of her husband, and another face beside him, a young native woman. Nakai's expression turned to stone. That's her. Evelyn's voice broke. Her who? My sister, he said, every word burning with fury, barely held in check. Your husband's company raided our camp near the Rio Verde. They said the land was theirs. He led them. She tried to save a child. His hands clenched at his sides. He shot her in the back. Evelyn staggered backward, shaking her head as if denial could erase the truth. No, no, my husband worked in the mines. He couldn't have. Nakai's eyes flicked to the insignia. You think he told you everything? You think good men don't hide bad things? The locket trembled in her hands. Her husband's face, smiling beside a woman he'd killed, was more than she could bear. She dropped it. It hit the floor with a hollow clang that echoed through the cabin. Outside, a crow screamed in the distance, a sharp, mournful sound that seemed to cut through the morning fog. Evelyn's chest heaved. You came here for revenge, she said hoarsely. I came for the truth, Nakai said. But revenge follows truth like a shadow. She turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. Tears stung her eyes, hot and shameful. You could have just killed me. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment his anger faltered. If I wanted that, I'd have done it before I knocked. The air between them quivered with the weight of everything they now knew, two lives built on lies. Both stained by the same man. After a long silence, Evelyn whispered, What will you do now? Nakai's gaze shifted to the horizon through the narrow window. The morning sun had begun to burn through the fog, casting light across the plains. Finish what he started, he said quietly. But not in the way he did. Evelyn's pulse quickened. What does that mean? He looked back at her, and his expression was unreadable, somewhere between mercy and vengeance. It means I need your help, Evelyn Harper. Her breath caught in her throat. And for the first time since the storm, she realized the real danger wasn't outside her cabin, it was already inside. The morning light spilled through the cabin window, cutting across the floorboards where the open box still lay like a wound that couldn't close. Evelyn Harper sat in her chair, fingers clasped tight, staring at the photograph that refused to let her look away. Her husband's smile, warm, familiar, and cruel in new light, burned behind her eyelids. Across the room, Nakai crouched by the window, his long black hair falling over his face as he watched the plains. He had said little since the discovery, his silence more unsettling than anger. Evelyn finally spoke, voice raw. You can't know for sure it was him. Nakai's dark eyes lifted to hers, calm and cutting. The insignia belonged to his unit. The raid happened the same season your husband vanished from the mines. The locket was found in her hand when I buried her. You think that's chance? Evelyn's stomach twisted. No. I think you're hurt. And grief. Grief makes people see monsters where there aren't any. He rose slowly, his bare chest gleaming in the pale light, the beads of his tribal necklace brushing against his skin. And what if the monster lived under your roof, Evelyn? She flinched. The name sounded different when he said it, gentler, yet edged with sorrow. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly. Silent, but for the wind scraping across the dry grass. Finally, Nakai crossed the room and knelt before her. I came here ready to kill the woman who loved him. But you didn't know. I see that now. Her voice cracked. If what you're saying is true, then I've been mourning a lie. I've been lighting candles for a murderer. He looked at her, his gaze softening. Then stop mourning him. She pressed the locket against her chest, the metal biting into her skin. You don't understand. He was all I had left. Even if he was a monster, he was mine. The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time since entering her home, Nakai looked away. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, the firelight catching on the faint scars across his knuckles. I buried her with my own hands, he said quietly. She was 16. My little sister. The youngest of us. I promised my mother I'd keep her safe. His voice trembled, rough and uneven. When I found her, her eyes were open, like she'd been waiting for someone to save her. Evelyn's throat tightened. She couldn't stop her tears this time. I'm sorry, Nakai, she whispered. I truly am. He nodded once, as though he didn't trust his voice enough to answer. Outside, The wind shifted. Evelyn rose to close the door but froze. Hoofbeats. Faint. But drawing closer. Nakai straightened instantly, his instincts sharpening. "They've come." "Who?" she asked, panic rising. "The marshal," he said grimly. "And men who'd rather shoot than ask questions." Evelyn's breath quickened. She glanced toward the rifle leaning by the hearth. "You have to hide." "There's nowhere to hide," he said. "Not for men like me." She stepped closer, her fear replaced by something fiercer. "I won't let them kill you here. Not after this. Not after what we know." He gave her a long, searching look, half disbelief, half respect. "You'd stand against your own for me?" She swallowed hard. "Not for you. For what's right." The sound of horses grew louder. Dust began to swirl outside the window, and through the cracks she saw movement shadows of riders. Rifles glinting in the sunlight. Evelyn darted toward the back door, pulling aside the curtain. "There's a trail that leads to the ridge. You can make it if you," a loud voice thundered from outside. "Evelyn Harper." "Step out now." Her blood ran cold. It was Marshal Kent. Nakai reached for the knife at his belt. "Stay back," he muttered. She turned to him sharply. "No blood. Not here. Not again." He hesitated, then slowly lowered the blade. Evelyn grabbed his arm and guided him toward the corner where an old trapdoor sat, hidden under a wool rug. She pulled it open, revealing a small root cellar. "Go," she whispered. "I'll stall them." He looked down at her, eyes dark with warning. "If they find out, they won't," she cut in. "Now hurry." For a heartbeat, he stood there, his expression unreadable. Then he descended into the cellar, disappearing into the darkness. Evelyn closed the trapdoor just as boots thudded on her porch. She wiped her tears, steadied her breath, and faced the door. When Marshal Kent kicked it open, the first thing he saw was the locket gleaming in her hand and the firelight dancing across her defiant face. He raised his rifle. "Where is he, Mrs. Harper?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "There's no one here, Marshal." Outside, the wind screamed through the empty planes and under the floorboards. Nakai listened, his hand gripping his knife, his heartbeat echoing the promise he'd made to his sister and the woman now risking everything for him. And somewhere between guilt and survival, a fragile thread of trust began to pull them toward something neither of them yet understood. The air outside the cabin had turned still, that eerie, suffocating calm that always came before something terrible. Emily felt it in her chest as she stood near the window, her trembling fingers clutching the worn curtain. Beyond the distant ridge, faint dust rose against the dying light. Riders were coming. "Rafael," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "They've found you." The Apache warrior, muscular and shirtless, stood by the firelight like a shadow carved from the wilderness itself. His long black hair was still damp from the morning river wash, and the flicker of the flames danced across his skin, glinting against the turquoise beads of his tribal jewelry. His deep, dark eyes turned toward her, calm but not surprised. "I knew they would," he said quietly. "Men like them don't forget a hunt." He picked up his bow and knife from the table, checking the edges with the precision of a man who had lived his life on the border between survival and death. Emily's breath caught as she stepped closer. "They'll kill you," she said, her voice breaking. "If you stay here, if they think I helped you, they'll kill me too." Rafael's gaze softened, though his face remained unreadable. "Then you should go. Take the back trail through the cottonwoods. You'll be safe if you keep to the river." Emily shook her head fiercely. "No, I won't leave you. Not after everything." He turned away from her then, his hand tightening around the bow. "You don't understand what they think I am. To them, I'm a savage, a murderer. They won't stop until they've put my head on a pike outside Fort Mason." His voice was quiet but cold, the words filled with memories that weighed like stones. Emily stepped forward, the sound of her bare feet on the wooden floor breaking the silence. She reached out and placed a trembling hand against his chest. His heart was steady beneath her palm, the rhythm strong and defiant. "I don't care what they think you are," she whispered. "I know who you are." For a moment, the warrior stood motionless. Outside, a wind picked up, carrying the faint, unmistakable sound of hooves. Dozens of them. Rafael's hand came up, covering hers gently. "If I die tonight," he said softly, "I want you to remember something." Emily looked up at him, eyes brimming with tears. "Don't say that. Listen." His voice was low, but every word carried weight. "You saved me. When you opened that door, you gave me something I didn't believe I'd ever see again, mercy. Whatever happens next, don't let them take that from you." Her lips trembled. "Rafael." A sharp gunshot cracked through the air, shattering the moment. The window beside them exploded in a spray of glass and splinters. Emily screamed, ducking to the floor as Rafael moved instantly, pushing her behind the table. "Stay down." He shouted, drawing his knife and slipping toward the wall like a panther stalking through shadows. More shots followed, the sound of men yelling outside, boots crunching on the dirt. "Come out, Apache," a voice bellowed. "We know you're in there. And the woman, too, she hanged for helping you." Emily's heart pounded so loud she thought it would give them away. She could see their shadows moving against the firelight through the cracks in the wall. Rafael crouched near the door, breathing slow, controlled. Then, in one swift motion, he kicked the door open and dove into the night. Gunfire roared, thunderous and blinding. She saw flashes of light, the blur of his body moving like smoke through the storm of bullets. Then silence. Emily waited, seconds stretching into eternities. Finally, a body crashed back through the doorway. She screamed, thinking it was him, but it was one of the men. Bleeding out on her floor dot when Rafael reappeared, his chest was heaving, blood streaked across his arm, his knife glistening red. He slammed the door shut and dragged a heavy beam across it. "They're not done," he said grimly, glancing out the window. "They'll bring more by dawn." Emily clutched his arm, her tears hot against her cheeks. "Then we run," she said, voice trembling but sure. Rafael looked at her, something fierce and unspoken burning in his eyes. "If we run," he said, "we run together." Outside, the night howled, and somewhere beyond the hills, the rest of the riders were coming. But inside that small wooden cabin, two hearts beat in defiance, a lonely Apache, and the woman who defied her own world to stand beside him. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, Emily whispered the words she once feared to say, "Please, come inside." The storm had returned, but this time she wasn't afraid. The horizon was painted with fire. The cabin behind them was nothing more than a glowing scar on the dark land, its roof collapsing under the fury of flames. Smoke clawed at the stars, and Emily stumbled through the tall grass, clutching Rafael's arm as they fled into the wilderness. "Keep moving," Rafael murmured, his deep voice low and rough from smoke. His breath came hard, but his pace never faltered. The muscular Apache warrior, shirtless and bleeding, looked like a ghost forged from ash and moonlight. His long black hair whipped across his face, and his tribal jewelry beads of bone turquoise and leather caught the faint glint of firelight as they ran. Behind them, distant gunfire echoed, growing faint as the riders lost their trail among the river rocks. But Emily knew they would not stop hunting. When they finally reached the edge of the canyon, Rafael stopped and turned, scanning the horizon. His chest rose and fell in heavy rhythm, sweat and blood mixing on his skin. "They'll circle east," he said, pointing toward the distant hills. "We have maybe 2 hours before they find the tracks again." Emily looked up at him, her hair damp and tangled, her dress torn at the hem. "And then what? We can't just keep running, Rafael." He gave her a look that was both fierce and tender. "Running is the only thing keeping us alive." The night air was cold and biting, but his nearness made her feel a strange warmth she hadn't known in years, something wild and steady all at once. They crouched beside a cluster of rocks, catching their breath. The only sound was the rushing of the river below. For a while, neither spoke. The stars above seemed endless, watching them like silent witnesses. Then Emily broke the quiet. "When I saw you that night, bleeding on my doorstep," she whispered, "I should have closed the door." Any sane woman would have. Rafael turned his head toward her, eyes dark and unreadable. "Why didn't you?" She met his gaze. "Because something in me already knew I wouldn't let you die." A faint smile touched his lips, fleeting and sad. "Mercy is dangerous, Emily. It ties people together in ways neither of them expect." "Maybe I don't care," she said softly. The wind shifted, then bringing with it the faint, distant sound of hooves again. Rafael stiffened instantly. He rose to his feet and pulled her up. "They're closer than I thought." He grabbed her hand and led her down the narrow path toward the river. The moonlight spilled silver across his shoulders, muscles taut as he guided her across the slick rocks. The cold water bit into their legs, but he didn't slow down until they were deep in the canyon shadows. They stopped beneath a cluster of pines. The scent of resin thickened the air. Rafael crouched, scanning the dark ridge above them, then motioned for silence. Emily knelt beside him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might echo. 2 riders appeared on the ridge, their torches cutting through the darkness like angry stars. "Rafael," she whispered. Gripping his arm, "They're right there." He pressed a finger to her lips, his eyes never leaving the ridge. The tension was unbearable. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if the earth itself was on their side, a low growl of thunder rolled across the valley. Rain began to fall again, slow at first, then hard and steady. The torches sputtered and died. Rafael exhaled slowly. "The storm covers us," he said. "It's our only chance." They pressed deeper into the canyon, the rain soaking their skin and hair. By the time they found a shallow cave beneath an overhang, the world outside was a blur of water and sound. Emily collapsed near the wall, trembling. Rafael knelt beside her, his breathing ragged. The firelight from a small ember they lit shimmered across his face, across his scars. He looked at her then, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. "You should rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." But Emily reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. "You can't keep carrying all of this alone." He froze, her touch stopping him in a way bullets couldn't. "I've been alone my whole life," he said quietly. "Not anymore," she whispered. The rain outside became a lullaby, the storm softening into mist. In that hidden place tucked between danger and dawn, they sat together in silence. 2 broken souls bound by fate. And for the first time since the night she opened that door, Emily felt something she never thought she'd feel again. Hope. Even if the world was burning around them. The rain had passed, leaving behind a pale hush over the desert. Dawn crept slowly across the canyon, touching the stones with a faint gold light. Emily stirred awake, wrapped in Rafael's coat, the scent of smoke and earth lingering in the air. For a moment, she forgot the danger, forgot the men who hunted them, the flames that devoured her home. All she saw was him. Rafael stood at the mouth of the cave, his muscular, shirtless body bathed in the amber glow of morning. His long black hair hung damp down his back, his tribal jewelry, bone, turquoise, and feather, glinting faintly in the new light. There was something timeless in his stillness, something both fragile and fierce, as though he belonged more to the earth than any man she had ever known. He turned when he felt her watching. "You should rest," he said softly. "I can't." she whispered. Not while they're still out there. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. They'll come. But not today. The storm took our trail. We have a few hours before the desert speaks again. Emily rose and joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast ocean of red stone, still glistening from the rain. Somewhere in the distance, smoke from their burned cabin curled faintly against the horizon. I lost everything, she murmured. That cabin was all I had. Rafael's gaze stayed fixed on the lightening sky. You still have your heart. That's more than most people keep. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw not the warrior the world feared, but the man who had risked his life to protect her. What about you? She asked softly. What do you have left? His lips curved into a faint, tired smile. Only what you gave me. The words hung between them like smoke, fragile and true. Before Emily could answer, the sound of distant hoofbeats echoed faintly through the canyon. Her breath caught. Rafael. He was already moving, scanning the ridges, listening. They're not close yet, he said quietly. But they will be. He turned to her then, his dark eyes calm and sure. There's a place across that ridge, he said, pointing toward the western slope. A sacred ground of my people. If we reach it, they won't follow. Not even soldiers dare trespass there. Then we go, she said quickly, but he shook his head. It's a hard climb. You'll slow me down. Her jaw tightened. Then I'll slow you down. I'm not leaving you, Rafael. He stared at her for a long moment. Then finally, something in him broke. He reached out and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a fierce, desperate embrace. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and wild, like the pulse of the desert itself. I never wanted you to get caught in my war, he whispered. But now I can't imagine this world without you in it. She closed her eyes. Then don't. They didn't speak again as they began the climb. The sun rose higher, baking the wet ground, and the air shimmered with heat. Rafael led the way, his movements graceful and sure despite his wounds. Emily followed, her legs aching, her heart pounding. By midday, the canyon opened into a wide plateau ringed by ancient stones carved with Apache symbols. The place felt alive, the air charged with silence and memory. Rafael slowed, touching one of the stones reverently. My ancestors rest here, he said. If I die, let it be among them. Emily's throat tightened. Don't talk like that. Before he could reply, a sharp whistle sliced through the air, followed by the crack of a rifle. The bullet hit the ground near his feet. They found us. Emily cried. Rafael spun, drawing his knife, but there were too many. The riders crested the ridge, half a dozen men with rifles raised. Dust rose behind them like ghosts. Rafael stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and the gunman. His voice was steady, defiant. You've taken enough blood, he called out. Leave her be. One of the riders, a man with a scar down his cheek, sneered. We came for both of you. The gunshot that followed echoed across the stones. Rafael staggered back, clutching his side, crimson blooming across his ribs. Emily screamed and ran to him, catching him before he fell. No. No, stay with me. She cried, pressing her hands against the wound. Rafael's breathing grew shallow, but his eyes stayed on her. Don't cry, he whispered. You gave me peace. No warrior could ask for more. Tears streaked down her face as she held him. Please, Rafael, don't you leave me. He managed a faint smile. You told me not to come inside that night. His voice was barely a whisper now. But you let me into your heart, and that's where I'll stay. His hand fell limp against hers. The wind moved softly across the plateau, carrying the faint scent of rain. The gunmen watched from a distance, their expressions uneasy, as if something unseen pressed upon them. Then one by one, they turned their horses and rode away, leaving Emily alone beside the fallen warrior. When the sun finally dipped low, she sat beside him in silence, the desert painted in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment she thought she saw him in the light, standing tall again, proud, free. His long black hair lifted by the wind, she smiled through her tears. "You're home now, Rafael." The last light of day faded, but in that sacred place his spirit stayed, guarding her as eternal as the desert itself.